Wonderful. Well, welcome. We are so glad to have you all join us for another ISQOLS webinar. Today we are joined by Veronica. Is it Vienne?
Bien.
Vienne. And she's going to present Does It Matter Where It Comes From? Happiness and Air Pollution Sources. So we're grateful for her. Just to give you a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, for those of you who are joining us, if you could please keep yourself on mute and your video off during the presentation, just to save on bandwidth and not to distract from our presenter. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to take your cursor down to the little bar on the bottom. You can see it says chat, and I'll send a little message so you can see. And just simply write in your question or your comment, and we will address that at the end. Or you just save it to the end. We'll have a time for question and answers after Veronica is done with her presentation. She'll certainly give us time to address any questions or comments that you have. Just a reminder that this is being recorded, so we are going to be putting this up on our ISQOLS YouTube channel and on our website at the end of the session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Veronica, and unless you have any other questions, take it away.
Right, thank you, Jill. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank the International Society for Quality of Life Studies for giving me the opportunity to present my research here. And I'm very much looking forward to all your questions and feedback. So a little bit about myself before we start. As Jill told you, I'm Veronica Vienne. I'm a PhD student in economics at the University of Manchester in the UK. My research focuses on both environmental economics and happiness economics. So in this research, I'm looking at human well-being, but in other projects I have, I'm also looking at socio-emotional development in children and so on. But today I will be talking about my first thesis chapter titled Does It Matter Where It Comes From? Happiness and Air Pollution Sources. So exposure to harmful levels of air pollution affects people through many channels. For example, it might reduce our capacity to perform certain activities such as exercising, or it can also affect our visibility and even our capacity of smell. But obviously, the clearest effect that air pollution has on people is through its effect on health. For example, the clinical, toxicological, and epidemiological literatures have found a clear link between harmful levels of air pollution and incidence of asthma disease, and even a high risk of heart disease. But it's not only physical health that has been linked with air pollution. Recent studies from those literatures have found a link between air pollution and depression rates and even suicide rates. And we can wrap all these effects up by saying that, well, air pollution affects people's overall well-being, right? And because of that, in this study, I will focus on how to reduce these harmful levels of air pollution in a hope to increase people's well-being. And how do I plan to do this? I plan to do this by looking at where air pollution is produced. So if you want to reduce air pollution, you need to go to its source. And that's why I will look at air pollution sources. So the main idea of my paper is, well, overall air pollution affects individuals regardless of how it's produced. So for example, you are exposed to let's say a smog fog, and that has all the detrimental effects that I told you about. Being exposed to that amount of air pollution will affect you in a certain way, regardless on who produced it. If it was a firm, if it was yourself, if it was a car, it wouldn't matter. However, my hypothesis is that changes of air pollution can affect people differently, depending on who produces those changes. So policy targeting firms, for example, will have a different effect on people's well-being than if there's a policy targeting transport, or if there's a policy targeting households air pollution. So let me just clarify this idea with some examples. So let's say that the government introduces a policy to reduce air pollution produced by households. Say, for example, that it would be that in high pollution days, as households in a certain urban center cannot use their wood burning heating system because of all the pollution it produces. That policy by itself will make an abatement of air pollution levels. So air pollution levels will be reduced, so improve their quality. But this policy will also imply that for some households, they, for example, might choose to spend money on a different heating system, right? Resulting in a reduction of air pollution and changes in their well-being because of that. But there will be other households that will not be able to afford that, or will choose not to do it, and they will have changes on their well-being because of, for example, their comfort levels might be affected. So, for example, if they can't use their wood burning systems for heating, they will basically be cold, and therefore their well-being will be affected. Another example will be transport. So if there's a policy targeting transport, such as like a daily transit restriction based on license plate numbers, such as the one that's in place in Chile, my place of study, that will of course reduce air pollution, but that will also affect people by making them reevaluate how they commute. So, for example, now they find that commuting by car is not as reliable as it was before, and they might change, for example, to walking or using the public transport system. And they will also have an impact on their well-being because of the air pollution they're exposed to, the commuting times, their comfort, and so on. And finally, the same will happen if there's a policy targeting firms. And the link here between firms and individuals is not as clear as with the other two. So let's say there's a policy targeting air pollution coming from firms. That will, of course, lower air pollution levels. But it's not so clear how that will affect a person, like an individual, assuming that's not the owner of the company. It will affect him or her because this company is within the same city, right? And this person might work in this firm or in this group of firms. So by affecting the cost structure of this firm, that will affect the chances of being employed of this person, or in other words, it might affect his or her expected wage. So basically what I'm saying here is that policies will affect air quality, will affect air pollution, but those spillovers will be different depending on where the policies are being targeted to. So in a nutshell, in case you have to leave, my research question is, are sources of changes of urban air pollution relevant for people's well-being? And in this case, I looked into life satisfaction in specific. The methodology that I use is the life satisfaction approach, which I'll be explaining shortly. My empirical study is carried in urban Chile. My results are that, well, sources of air pollution are relevant, so it does matter where air pollution comes from, but I find some unexpected directions on the relations between subjective well-being and air pollution sources. Well, and the policy implications of this research is that the results from it will help to design better targeted policies. So a little bit of background. My research, as I told you, focuses on urban Chile. And why is this? I focus on it because, well, it's a highly polluted country. This year, a study from an independent company showed that 25 out of the 30 most polluted cities in South America, are in the country, are in Chile. And that's only by PM 2.5, which is a fine particulate matter, but the same story is replicated within other pollutants. And also, because of its geography, we can find a lot of spatial heterogeneity. For example, this map shows the air pollution by PM 2.5, and we can see that it's mainly focused in the south. But if we look at other sources of air pollution, the picture will be the other way around, and so on. And here in this other map that shows the climate zones throughout the country, you can also see the spatial heterogeneity, and that will imply differences in air pollution sources. So at the beginning of the country in the north, we have desert, then a Mediterranean weather that moves into highly rainy weather and moving to tundra in Patagonia. So it's a perfect place of study because sadly it's highly polluted, and also it has a lot of heterogeneity in the sources of air pollution, which is what I'm trying to see. Right. So how did I do this? I used the life satisfaction approach. As I told you, study economics. So the study of well-being in environmental economics, it's called life satisfaction approach. And the main idea of it is that I use subjective well-being scores as a proxy of utility levels. So the concept of utility is key in economics, and we use it both in macro and microeconomics. But we never really study what it is, and we assume it to not be observable. The main idea of the life satisfaction approach is that we do have some information about utility levels, and we have them in the form of subjective well-being scores that are observable. And the key assumption that this approach makes, and therefore the one I am assuming, is that the individual's self-reported life satisfaction, so the subjective well-being I can see, is giving me some information about people's true utility with some noise, but that noise is small enough for me to be able to derive conclusions from the life satisfaction data. And well, this is not a new idea. The first paper that used subjective well-being scores in economics dates back to Sterling in 1974. Then for the next couple of decades, pretty much nothing happened in economics with respect to subjective well-being until its use was revisited in the early 2000s. And the first paper in environmental economics that used subjective well-being to study air pollution, was Welsh in 2002. He studied European countries at a country level data. And to the best of my knowledge, no work has used the life satisfaction approach to study the sources of an environmental amenity. Right, so I'll just try to formalize now the idea of the life satisfaction approach. So I told you that utility is a key concept in economics, and I will just say that, well, the utility of a person living in a household in a certain place at a certain time depends on how much money they have and on their individual household and location characteristics. And I will also say that the environmental amenity, that in this case would be air pollution levels, is included in the location characteristics. So for example, I live in Manchester, I live in a household, I have certain characteristics, and my location, because I live in Manchester, it rains a lot, there's some air pollution, and that will imply that I'm affected by it, and that will have some effect on my utility levels. And then in 2008, obviously this notion dates from before, but Dolan and authors formalized it. They say that, well, subjective well-being is some reporting function R of the true utility of a person, right? And we do not know exactly the functional form of R. We just make some assumptions about it. For example, we say that this reporting function R, it's ranking preserving, and some others. Basically, is the assumptions that we make about R are the assumptions that I told you we make, that the noise of the subjective well-being scores is small enough for us to derive conclusions from it. Empirically, we use an additive function, so we use a regression to model subjective well-being. So subjective well-being depends on individual household location characteristics and on the person's wealth, plus an error term that includes everything else. And because I do economics, I try to put everything into monetary terms. And Ferreira and Moro did that in 2010. So they say the implicit price for changes in the environmental amenity, that would be, in other words, the willingness to pay for changes in pollution, for my specific research, would be the ratio between the delta of the environmental amenity and the theta that goes with the wealth, multiplied by average wealth in the sample. Now, as I told you, I don't study air pollution as a whole. I will focus on the sources. So I made a little tweak into the life satisfaction approach to adapt it to what I wanted to study. So what I'm saying now is that the environmental quality, the environmental amenity measure will be replaced by a vector. And this vector will be the addition, the classification of the total exposure of that pollutant divided into three buckets. So what I say, for example, carbon monoxide, total carbon monoxide in a city will be the addition of the carbon monoxide that comes from the households, that comes from the firms, and of the one that comes from transport. And therefore, instead of using the total amount of carbon monoxide that there's in the city, I classify it into three: the one that comes from households, the one that comes from firms, and the one that comes from transport. And all the rest remains the same. This regression in blue is the one that I estimate in the result. Right, so how did I do this? I gather a data set for urban Chile. I have an individual level repeated cross-section for years 2011 and 2013 for 81 municipalities, which are 22 urban centers. So by an urban center, I might mean either a big city, like a regional capital, or a conurbation of cities. For example, in the metropolitan region where the capital of the country is, so it's Santiago, but Greater Santiago includes many other municipalities, and they're all in the same urban center. For the air pollution data, I use the Pollutant Release and Transfer Registry, which is a data set available for all OECD countries. And I use the average daily concentration for 7 pollutants in standardized values, because it's easier to compare them. For the climate data, I use historical data for the 2 years I told you from the Center of Climate and Resilience Research. And well, the individual and household data comes from the household survey CASEN, and the specific question that I used, so my subjective well-being measure, in this case is a life satisfaction question that says, considering all things, how satisfied with your life are you at this moment? And it's in a 10-point scale. So they say from 1 to 10, how satisfied with your life you are considering everything. That's the measure I have of subjective well-being, and some information from utility therefore. Right, to quickly go through the results, because I'm running out of time. So I run regression number 6, the one here in blue. I run it with all the probit and ordinary least squares. Obviously, I prefer all the probit because it takes into account the ranking. The ordinal nature of the life satisfaction question. It doesn't assume it to be a cardinal continuous variable. And the summary of the result, to not bother you with the tables, said that for firms, the air pollution that's produced by firms is consistently negatively related to subjective well-being, right? So basically, I'm saying that air pollution from firms has a negative effect on people's subjective well-being on average. That relation is negative for all pollutants, but it's only significant for carbon monoxide. Then for transport, I find a mixed picture. So for transport, I find that for carbon monoxide and for ammonia, there's a significantly negative relationship between subjective well-being and the air pollution coming from transport from these two pollutants. However, I find a positive relation between the air pollution, the fine particulate matter pollution, and subjective well-being. That would be like what I wouldn't have expected. But I think what's most interesting here, and what I'm still working on, as this is a work in progress, by the way, I found that there's a consistent and significant for all pollutants, there's a positive and significant relation between subjective well-being and air pollution coming from households. This relation is positive and statistically significant for all pollutants and throughout the country. So it's very stable. It's a very stable relation. So to conclude my presentation and answering my paper's title, does it matter where it comes from? I can say that it does matter where air pollution comes from. So in other words, my key finding here is that changes in air pollution have different effects on people depending on where they produce. So it's not the same targeting a policy on firms than targeting a policy on households and so on. Some future work, I need to get into the channels on how these changes are produced, and also I would like to try to see on the data some explanations on why these relations have an unexpected sign, because I have some hypotheses about them, but I would like to see them in the data. So I have two hypotheses for why the relation between subjective well-being from households has a positive relation, a stable and positive relation between subjective well-being and air pollution. And the first one is that, well, this would mean that the positive implications of producing some air pollution at a single household level outweighed the detrimental effects that air pollution has on you. So basically, I'm saying that people prefer to produce some air pollution, let's say for comfort, for heating, for cooking, for living, and they rather have that and take a little bit of air pollution. So the positive change in well-being produced by the positive benefits of producing air pollution might be greater than the detrimental effects that air pollution has on their well-being, on their health, and on the other channels I explained at the beginning. And my second hypothesis is related to the actual question of the survey. So I said that the question was, considering all things, how satisfied you are you with your life at this moment? The key part here is at this moment. So I'm having information for the present time, but the detrimental effects of air pollution might be realized in the future. And therefore people might not be thinking about the future when they are asked how satisfied with your life you are at this moment. That might explain to also the positive sign here. And well, when I have that figured out, I will monetize the willingness to pay for changes in air pollution by source, finishing the life satisfaction approach. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, this research was funded by the ESRC. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Veronica.
Thank you.
Very interesting. We have several participants with us, so at this point we have time for questions and answers or comments. So if anyone would like to make a comment or ask a question, now is your time. You can feel free to write it in the chat bar if you take your cursor down to that chat bar, or just simply, since we don't have many participants, just simply unmute yourself or put your video on. We've got, is it Pia Loco?
Mm-hmm.
saying that right? Hi, feel
Yeah.
free to.
Okay, thank you. Hi Veronica, my name is Pia, and I have actually 3 questions. The first one is, it is relating about the time period. You say you have data for 2 years, 2011 and 2013. And I wanted to know, just out of curiosity, are these like average years, or maybe there was some kind of crisis? Does it depend a lot on of the season? Is it data from winter, summer, or maybe it doesn't matter? I'm sorry, I have no idea about this topic. The second question is, people can distinguish the different pollutants. Like, can you feel something different if the pollutant is like because people are burning biomass instead of just having pollution that's coming from the farms? I don't know if you do feel something different, or you can distinguish where as a person in the street, if you can distinguish that. And the third question, sorry, is if you have some kind of like heterogeneity in the cities, is the effect the same in the north, in the south, in the center of the country, or have you looked at something there?
Can you repeat the third question, please?
Yeah, if you have some heterogeneity in different regions or city, is it the same effect in the north, in the center, and in the south of the country?
Mm-hmm. Right. So the first question, it was about, thank you very much for your question, by the way. Great questions. So the first one, I had to constrain my analysis to 2011 and 2013 because of data availability. This is because the household survey that I use, CASEN, only included a life satisfaction question for those 2 years, and then that question disappeared. There were other surveys that included life satisfaction questions, such as the youth survey, but the CASEN is the only one that's representative at a municipality level. So even though I had a restriction in years, I decided to go with that one because I had that advantage, that it was more representative than the other ones. The second question was about the people being able to distinguish. So no, I argue they're not. So what I say is that, well, people don't realize where air pollution is coming from, like the air pollution itself. What they do realize is that when there are changes produced by policies, they realize that the spillovers from those policies are different depending on where the changes are coming from. So they people don't have any idea of where the air pollution is coming from. They might have some idea, but I'm assuming they don't, or they might, but it's not needed that they need to know. But I'm assuming that for the changes, they will have different effects depending on if the pollution is if the changes of air pollution are coming from firms, or if they're coming from households or from transport. So it's the spillovers that will also affect well-being produced by the policies, the differently targeted policies, that will have a different effect on people's well-being. But the air pollution itself, no. And about the third question, the heterogeneity, I haven't looked into that yet. I am about to look into that. So as I stress a lot about heterogeneity, but I didn't. It's true, I didn't show any heterogeneous results. Sorry. And I'm still working on those, so I haven't had any results to show about that, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you a lot.
Great questions, thank you. Anyone else have any other questions or comments? I just had one question regarding governmental regulations in Chile, or in particular, there certainly are governmental regulations here in the United States, where I'm located, that are relevant to our households. So I'm wondering if you, because I didn't see that in your presentation, if you were able to give a little brief overview of that. What's the current status for governmental regulations for households?
For households, well, they're very localized, so it really depends on where you live. For example, if you live in Santiago, they're the ones that started with the regulations back in the 90s. And for example, they cannot have chimneys in their houses in the urban area. And now in the 2000s, 2010s, new regulations started in the south for households. The most unpopular one, like the most well-known because it's so unpopular, is that in emergency days, certain neighborhoods in certain cities cannot have any wood burning going on. So they basically shut a neighborhood so air pollution gets better, and then when it does, they are able to have a good burning again. But those are the restrictive ones, and there have also been subsidizing new technology. So there are programs run by the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Environment that encourage people by subsidizing better technology. So changing from self-made wood stove, a wood burning stove, to change to a pellet one, or even to change to a paraffin one that are less pollutant than the self-made ones. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and do you foresee potentially sharing your research with any of the local governments? Hopefully the correlation
that's
between.
the aim when I finish it. Yeah.
Good. And what are your next steps for this project?
So my next steps are to I'm trying to look at policies that happened between these 2 years. So anything that happened in 2012 or at the beginning of 2013 will help me to try to figure out the channels that I talked about in my last slide. I will, at this moment, I'm reading a lot of laws to see when changes happen and where they happen, because as I told you, they're very everything's like very localized. So I can have policy changes going at the city level or even the neighborhood level. So I'm trying to look into what happened in like a year and a half between 2012 and mid 2013. And when I do that, I would like to monetize all these changes, basically because it's easier to explain it in money to policymakers.
Yes, that's the universal language, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Pia, your hand is still up, so I don't know if you had another question or that was still from the previous one.
No, I don't know how to. Okay, I see the button.
She didn't know how to mute herself.
Oh, okay. Any other questions or comments?
No.
Okay, good. Well, thank you again for a really fascinating presentation. It's certainly an interesting topic, and we hopefully you'll be part of ISQOLS for the long haul, and we'll see you next year at our conference, and you can give a follow-up on this.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Be wonderful. Thank you to all of our participants, and we'll be sending out this webinar, the link, and as soon as it's up on our YouTube page, so you'll be able to watch and share with others. And hopefully Veronica will invite you again to give a follow-up when you're ready and hear all of the wonderful conclusions that you've made. So thank you to everyone, and we wish you all well. If you are interested, if you are a researcher, if you're interested in yourself in presenting, please contact us. We'd love to host a webinar so you can present your research as well. office@isqols.org. We also are in the process of planning 2021 conference, which at this point looking like it's going to be a virtual conference again, given the current situation. So stay tuned for those details on our website and in our newsletter. And with that, we'll say thank you again to Veronica, and thank you to everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop.